the story that we tell about ourselves is, it directly influences the way that other people see us.
All right, welcome everyone. I am so excited to be here today with Tania Bhattacharyya. Tania, welcome to What the Fundraising.
Thank you so much, Mallory. It's really, really great to be here. And I love the name of your podcast. It's like one of my favorite things ever.
It was funny. It sort of like niched me down really tight, even though the topics of the podcast go so far beyond fundraising. Although I do believe the experience of fundraising to be so multi-dimensional, but it was just too funny to not go with.
Oh, 100%. 100%. You had to go with it.
So let's just dive in. Tell everyone a little bit about you and what brings you to this conversation today.
Yeah, so I like to say that I was raised as a fundraiser, and there were plenty of experiences in my life where I was just like, WTF, what the fundraising? And so I started as a part-time fundraising coordinator as I was finishing up my undergrad degree in psychology. And that organization that I was at, I ended up staying at for 12 years, which tends to be a little bit rare, but it's an amazing org. And, they served women, pregnant women, women with their children who are achieving recovery from substance use disorder. They're getting well from addiction. And I love that org and carry it in my heart every day. But I did leave about a year and a half ago, to really pursue my vision of, empowering vision-led female founders, often nonprofit founders and often social impact entrepreneurs, to really stand out as they stand up for their mission. But, it's funny that you say fundraising is, it's so broad, because it is. The first thing I ever did in my fundraising journey was really sit with our patients at the organization and really, so essentially, let me backtrack. I was tasked with finding impact stories to be able to share in our newsletters, to be able to share with our donors. And so I would sit with our patients, one at a time, with their permission, people who had signed up to say, yes, I want to share my story. And, there was always an underlying vibe of like not enoughness, like the shame and the guilt and the trauma of their addiction always came out when they were sharing that story, and we began like very just organically, we began to engage in conversation that would then lead them to the power in their story, the courage of their decision to get sober, right? The fact that they were breaking generational cycles and generational curses of addiction that usually were in their family, right? And so they were able to see their story from a different lens. And for me, it stopped being about trying to get impact stories from our marketing materials. It became bigger than that, because I saw, especially as they became alumni and left the program and got jobs and went to school and came back to volunteer, I saw how when they had this different story about themselves, it really helped them like learn to advocate for themselves in a different way. And it taught me that the story that we tell about ourselves is, it directly influences the way that other people see us. Right. And so, interestingly, in kind of a parallel way, as I was doing that, I was helping our executive director with her thought leadership stories. Like, I'd ghostwrite her LinkedIn content. I would sometimes ghostwrite op-eds, and they were her words. I would just essentially take them and like massage them into the final version. But I saw how, and first of all, I just want to say she was a badass. She's still my mentor. Like, I talk to her all the time. She was highly credentialed. She had all the letters next to her name. She had like 40 years of clinical experience. She had lived experience. Like, she had all the things. She checked off all the boxes of credibility. And I was surprised as like, a young professional at how much, I will just say, like, impostery thoughts that she had. Like, she had fears around sharing her own story. And that taught me, what that taught me was even the most, just amazing, externally confident, highly credentialed, capable people also have their self-doubts. Like, I kind of thought I was the only one, right? But as she got 1% more uncomfortable with each piece and got herself out there as a fundraiser, it was amazing, because reporters just came out of the woodwork. They're like, tell me more about this thing, or board members would just start to be naturally attracted to our work because they saw us in the OC register, or they saw, or like a referral source or a doctor would see her speak at an event and they'd say, oh, I don't have any place to send my pregnant women. Like, tell me more about what you do. And so as a fundraiser, as a cheerleader, as a person whose job it was to go out there and like build relationships, it just, I didn't have to worry about where the funds were going to come from anymore, because we were just attracting and raising a sustainable stream from her sharing her stories. And so really to like kind of just wrap that up, I'm really all about stories, right? My career has been in fundraising, but I think that stories are kind of like our, our best tool to really build trust and community as we imagine and shape the future together for the better.
Ooh, okay. I love everything that you said. And I actually, what I want to explore first is this piece around the stories we tell ourselves, because I think there's a lot of focus in the nonprofit sector around crafting stories for external consumption first. And I remember as I was fundraising and leading organizations, going to different sort of workshops that were all about sort of like how you tell the story around X, Y, and Z for your donors or for, your community members, your volunteers. And never did I, in any of those trainings, have anyone say that a critical part of how you tell any story starts with the stories you're telling yourself, because that impacts the way that you show up, the way that you like sort of magnetize people into your network, the energy that you bring to certain situations. And I feel like what did ultimately fundamentally change the way that I fundraised was the shift in the story I was telling myself about myself. When that changed, it was like it opened up clarity and access to all the other types of stories that you're describing. Not that I didn't hear them before or maybe have the data, but I couldn't like access them somehow. I don't even know how to describe it, but yeah,
No,
you're
you're
nodding. So
describing
tell
it
me.
perfectly. You're describing it
Yeah.
perfectly. You're describing it so perfectly. I think what you're describing is like a lack of integration. Like integration is so important here because we all have big visions. Like our organization has a vision statement, has a mission statement. We personally oftentimes might have a vision statement. Usually it's aligned with the organization's vision. Sometimes it's a little different. Usually it's a little different, but aligned. And I have started asking my clients actually, because this is a big problem because when we are somatically, energetically, when we are not aligned with the vision, it creates problems. It creates performance, right? It creates posturing, whether we realize it or not, because we can't show up like with a fully embodied vision. There's something blocking us. And so I've started asking my clients, like, okay, what is the thing? Let's make a list of things. They could be actions, they could be thought patterns, they could be behaviors, any kind of barrier that stops you from fully living this vision. Like, what is that? And so I've started accumulating a list of them. And I think some of the most common ones, like they fall into buckets, right? I think one of the most common ones is like, I don't want people to think that I'm too much. Or I don't want people to think I'm not enough if I share this story. Like, and the, like the little stories under that would be, who cares about my story? It's not as bad as many of the other people in my community, right? I got lucky, so I feel bad sharing this. Some of the other ones that I hear too are, well, actually, before we even move on from there, I think that this one's a really interesting one in the nonprofit field because so often we're attracted to a mission or a vision because we have lived experience in it. And then we see our patients, we see our community, and we see their stories. And we think that we can't share our own stories again because we just didn't have it bad enough. But that creates this thing that I like to call the trauma Olympics. Like we think our stories have to be the worst or the most intense or like to have an impact. But no, all of our stories can have a really, really powerful impact. And you never know, right? Like, so I mentioned I worked in addiction treatment. And I don't have a personal story of substance use disorder. I just didn't have the allergy to drugs and alcohol in the way that our patients did. But that doesn't mean, I believe that all of us have addictive behaviors. For me, that was work, overwork. And even if it tends to be like a quote unquote good addiction, like it makes you look good in the eyes of others, like they're chipping away at you. We all have addictions that are chipping away at us. And so, we can share those stories, in the right place, in safe community with the right people. And you just never know what story is going to like turn the tide, is going to make people look at things differently. Because I know we had people who eventually became donors for our organization, especially, this was, 10 years ago, they just didn't understand addiction. Like, it was very stigmatized. It still is, but they just didn't get it. I mean, I remember presenting to Rotary clubs and such, or just different places. And, it was very much like, why would we give money to women who are choosing to abandon their kids? It was very, there's a lot of education that goes along with fundraising, but stories are a part of that, because maybe somebody's going to be able to understand addiction differently when you talk about and point out the fact, when you point out their overwork, when you point out their overspending. And that of course, if you're talking to a donor about that, it requires trust, but there are spaces where you can have those deep conversations and people will start to get it in a different way. So that was a ramble. Like, I don't know if I answered your question fully, but that's just what came to mind as I went down this road.
I don't even remember what my original question was, but I love what you said. And so, okay, so I'm curious, like, when you hear a client or something say one of those stories, like, I'm worried that I'm going to be too much, or I'm worried that, what do you think what is that underlying fear? What are they afraid is going to happen when they share that story?
Well, there's a beautiful quote, and I will send you who said it because I can't remember right now, but I want to cite it. Essentially, the quote is something around how the fear of being too much and the fear of being not enough are the exact same fear, right? It's the fear of being yourself and showing up fully as yourself. And I think those stories that we tell ourselves, those negatives, they're not actually our stories, right? Those are the stories of the inner critic, the inner chaperone, the itty bitty shitty committee, like whatever we want to call it. Like, that's our training. That is the conditioning that has been put in us by systems, much larger than we are, that are invisible, that we don't even realize are working to, like, indoctrinate us with these stories to kind of keep us small and keep things the way that they are. If we stay quiet and we just stay, like, kind of silent, comfortably silent, nothing will change. Everything will stay exactly as is, which is really, what some people want, like what the people who created the world, what the people who imagine this world want, right? But, all of us, if we have an inner critic or different voices that, come up, different parts that come up to try to protect ourselves, there's also an inner mentor, right? I work with a coach. She's amazing. Her name's Emily. She's an anti-depression life coach, and she's really taught me, like, all of these fractured parts have emerged to try to keep us safe and well and okay, like, in this world that we live in. But there's also an inner self, right? And a self with a capital S. Tara Moore, who wrote the book Playing Big, she calls it our inner mentor, right? And so, as many stories as we have that are trying to keep us safe, that are trying to chaperone us, there's also an inner mentor that is absolutely wise, has the answers. And if we can just stay still enough and get quiet enough, and a lot of things stop us from accessing this mentor. A lot of things that are present in nonprofit fundraising, like things like burnout, things like trying to hit, like, all these metrics, right? Just go, going, overwork. But when we can get really quiet and listen to our inner mentor, I think we have the answers. I think we have the right story. Yeah, and I forgot your initial question again.
No. I'm with you. I'm with you. So I forget again my initial question too, but I actually really love where you're taking this, because I feel like, so you're talking about how I usually refer to, like, visibility, right? So, like, that, like, when you are, you were talking before about how when we don't do the inner work, then there's this disconnect that happens, and there's this performance sort of that's created, right? And a lot of times that's created around perfectionism version of how we believe we need to tell that story. And then we can feel in our bodies deep. Sometimes it's so deep that maybe you don't think you can feel it yet, but it's there, right? And it's showing up in other ways, this disconnect between what you're saying and what's true, what that self with a capital S would say, what your inner mentor would say. And then that disconnect can be felt. Just like I think about, a plug for a light. If the plug is half in, the light's going to be flickering. It's going to be dim. It's going to go in and out. Like, sometimes it's going to be bright, But sometimes it's not. And like, what does it look like to like plug ourselves fully into ourselves? It requires this level of vulnerability that creates visibility, to be seen truly as you are, which is then like you are available for criticism that feels so much harder because it's true. It's really about you, not about a performance version of you. And so I'm curious. Oh, go ahead.
Well, I just want to add one thing to that. I love that analogy of the plug. I really, really, really like that a lot. One thing I want to say before we move on, because however this sounded to the reader, I want to say that it's not your fault. It's not our fault if this is happening. If our vision is misaligned or not integrated with how we're actually behaving in the world. It's not our fault, because these things that we're doing, this perfectionism, this overwork, this running from place to place with urgency, like those are actually protective factors. Like we've evolved them to protect ourselves so that we don't get just mashed up in this world that we live in, right? And so there's nothing wrong with us if we're that way, but there is a way out, right? But it requires a lot of that deep work, and it requires years of work, right? It's not going to happen overnight either. It's a process.
And lifelong work. I mean, I think like I'm really glad that you said that. And I think that's something we talk about a lot on this podcast, is like these ways that we are in misalignment or are not our fault. They are a product of the system. And that actually, in so many ways, I think, just to double click on what you said, it's like our body is being very smart to try to protect us, to try to keep us safe, right? It's not that our bodies are doing something wrong or our brains are doing something wrong, or even that like inner critic, or we call it the gremlin a lot here. It's like, it's just trying to keep you safe. And that, exactly as you said, that's not wrong. It's not our fault, but recognizing that it's a choice to identify when you need it, when you don't, to feel like you have access to other options of being when you want them. I think like that's, for me at least, where I think like the work lives, is just like, yes, this thing is here. This thing is a part of all of us in different ways. And like I say to my clients all the time about the gremlin, I don't know that, or the self-critic, like, I don't know that voice ever completely goes away. But the way that I think about it a lot is like, okay, but like, when does it get the microphone?
Right.
It's like, who gave it the mic? Like, who gave it the mic? And so sometimes I'll hear my own inner critic come up around and it's like, okay, like, I hear you screaming, like, you really want to keep me safe. You can see that there's some risk involved in this task. That to me is a sign that like, I'm being brave. I'm stepping outside of my comfort zone. Thank you so much for showing up and trying to raise like a red flag here, but I don't need it. So I'm just going to take that microphone back.
Yes, I love that so much, because you're able to now like build a relationship with that piece of yourself and like kind of navigate that relationship and take the microphone away. I like to think of it as, instead of being in the driver's seat, it's like locked away in the trunk. It's still there. It's still there. And I don't know that we're going to get away from it fully, but we don't necessarily need to, because at the end of the day, it is a protective factor. And as long as we can, navigate that relationship, then I think we're good. And something else that I know you and I have talked about that I think comes up here, it's not just things that have been conditioned into us in this lifetime, right? We have to look at what our parents went through, what our grandparents went through, what our great parents went through. And sometimes we don't know, but sometimes we know, even if they're not in words. Like, we know because our bodies know. And I'm a big fan of Resmaa Menakem. And I'm in his like 6-month kind of container right now, learning more about somatic abolitionism. But the way I think that fits into fundraising work is, I remember, my parents were refugees in the Bangladesh Liberation War. And I grew up in a gated community in Irvine, California, right? And so if you look at my ACEs score, it's like, oh, she's good, she's good. But there are things that have not been dealt with in my family lineage that now show up in me when I'm sitting across the thing from a fundraiser, from a donor. And these things start popping up. Like, am I going to say the right thing? If I don't say the right thing, what's going to happen? Like, and it's not things have way more weight than they need to, because I'm still dealing with like this survival energy that has never been healed from past generations. And so sometimes yeah, sometimes we have to think about that too.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's really important. And just another sort of, I don't know if example is the right word, but just like another reason why I think fundraising is like, it's so many things, it's so many pieces of our identity, like because it involves this incredibly vulnerable topic of money, value,
Mm,
self-worth,
yes.
identity. Like it is the at the core of fundraising is this good enough question. Am I good
Yes.
enough to get the validation of your money? That's how we've been programmed to fundraise. And that an activity that activates our inner critic in
Mm,
every action, that is, if we have not done some of this work, of course it's burning us out. Of course it's rocking us. It's like it is a deeply, deeply vulnerable thing. And so I think understanding the layers in our own identity, in our own lived experience, in our historical experience, in our lineage, and the epigenetic changes, like all of those things, like that's all so real, and so much gets activated in this
yes.
one moment. And we try to tell ourselves it's just fundraising, or it's like
Right. It's
just this
just a
meeting.
lunch. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just
But
a
it's
lunch.
not.
It's so much. It's so much is happening in that moment. And so I'm so curious, you were talking about this piece around, it's not your fault for feeling the way that you feel, and there's something else available to you. And I'm curious, like how you work with clients, or in the work that you're doing, you think about, okay, does visibility create, and maybe this is just the first question, do you believe that visibility creates an opening for more trauma to be
Mm.
inflicted?
I think visibility gives us an opportunity to step to that growth edge and decide and figure out what is too much. For me, doing an Instagram live is too much. I'm just not going to do it.
Mm.
I mean, I did it once with my friend Rachel because she asked me, and I was like, okay, I can do this. But, something,
Mm.
Rachel too, some
Mm-hmm.
things are going to be too far past the growth
Mm-hmm.
edge, and I'm just not going to step past that growth edge. I think it gives us the opportunity to figure out what is too much and
Mm.
allow ourselves to set up boundaries so that when people ask us to do something that is going to be past our growth edge, we can say no, right? We can say no.
Mm.
But there are things like doing a podcast. Like no one has to see. Like I'm wearing my pajamas right now,
I
and
love
it
that.
and I'm having a great conversation with with my friend. And so
Mm.
for me, that is okay. That feels good. That's a good
Mm.
thing. So yeah, of course, I think it could create an opening, but I think that as long as we are held, okay, so I think that and there's a second piece to this answer, which is entrepreneurship and sometimes fundraising, especially like if we're a small shop, can be very lonely. It can be very
Mm.
lonely. I have been in the place where I'm the only fundraiser in the organization, and if you're not a fundraiser, you don't get it. Like you don't get what it's like to go out there and do this work. To do this work that I think is really sacred work, but it's also scary work.
Mm.
And so if you're not held in a community, it's going to burn you up over time.
Mm.
And so that's why being a part of, for me, it was community centered fundraising.
Mm.
For me, it was, sometimes like our local AFP chapter can be that for us. But find your community that are working on doing the same things, whether it's getting visible, whether it's working on a capital campaign, whether it's like, like heavy grant writing, whatever it is that is making these things come up for you. Find other people who are doing the same thing, because
Mm.
trauma thrives in isolation, right? Or, well,
Mm.
these feelings thrive in isolation.
Mm.
And I think when we can hold it together in community, it makes it much, much easier to go down this path.
Mm, yeah. I mean, I think when you said that, I was like, yeah, I mean, like shame thrives in isolation. And I was thinking
Yeah.
about what you talked about at the very beginning with the women you were working with in the organization, and how sort of ashamed they felt at the beginning. And then it sounds like through the sort of ownership of their own story and maybe the reclaiming of their story, reframing them as the story allowed them to move from shame to feeling more proud, perhaps, of everything they had overcome and been through. And my guess is in that process of like bringing the thing to the light, we also are moving the trauma through us in different ways. And what do you think about
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, I mean later, so I was, just doing this process. I'm not, so I studied psychology. I'm not like a licensed clinician. I didn't get any like higher level degrees in psychology. And so I was doing this work and I was like, something's happening here. Like this seems to really be
Mm.
helping. And later I found out that it was very related to a type of therapy called narrative therapy, where people are
Mm.
actually able to, instead of being an actor in their life story, they become the director. They can rise above it and
Mm.
see their story for what it is, right? And see the power that's contained in their story and move forward in a way that is that where they've reclaimed their agency versus they're just following the script, right? So I think in some ways, right, like the storytelling, this way of framing the story differently, it's really a socially just, empowering thing. Another thing I remember is when I was, working at this addiction treatment program, we offered a therapy called psychodrama, which sounds intense, but all it is a experiential therapy where the group actually acts out a traumatic instance from somebody's life. In that group, right? And so like if I was the identified person, if I was like the person, I'd be going in there. Everybody around me in that group might play a different role, right? Like somebody
Mm.
might be my dad, somebody might be my aunt, somebody might be, whoever was in that situation. And then we get to act it out anew. We get to act it out in a different way where we have the agency to say what we couldn't say because we were 5, or we have the agency to walk away when we didn't because we couldn't, right? And so
Mm.
sometimes like there's different things that we can do to rewrite those stories, rewrite
Mm.
those narratives and live the rest of our lives in a different way, because so often it's those stories that are what's holding us back.
Mm. Okay. I had never heard of narrative therapy before, but what's really interesting about that one in particular is I've often found myself saying recently that a fundraising plan, everyone wants their fundraising plan, their fundraising strategy. And I'm like, okay, but that's the script. Like imagine a movie. That's the script. The movie is only going to be great if the director is great. Like the script is just the script, but actually where the power and the opportunity and the magic lies is who the director is. And who the director is depends on all the things that we're talking about, right? They're the director, and they get to decide sort of like how aligned they are as a director of that script based on so much of the work that we're talking about here. And so I just think it's so interesting that I had never heard that before, but just sort of the alignment between those principles, which is that we're sort of like inside the strategy. We're either inside the plan or we have more of this sort of empowered director level role that kind of pulls us out from the drama of it, perhaps in certain ways, and lets us really be able to like access a more kind of like global vantage point.
Yes, the 30,000 square foot view. Yeah,
Mm.
100%, 100%. Because so often, and I see this with storytelling all the time, like we are too close to it to really be able to see it for what it is. Whether it's a story, whether it's a fundraising plan, whether it's just like how we feel about fundraising, we are so
Mm.
close to it. There's a saying, when we're inside the bottle, it's really hard to read the label on the outside, right? And
Mm.
so, yeah, it's like getting that 30,000 foot view of all of it and being able to see it for what it is. And sometimes that requires help, right? Because we're in it. We're in it.
Mm.
So depending on what we're talking about, whether it's seeing a therapist, whether it's having a fundraising coach, whether it's getting together as a team and working together on like the strategic plan, all of these things can really help us get us out of any potential funk. we're in.
Yes. Okay. So there's a few things I want to ask you about, but I want to start with this one, which is, I feel like you and I are aligned in so many different ways. I think one of the things that I have felt sort of uniquely aligned with you, perhaps in comparison to maybe my other friends in this space, is that like somatic piece and like the listening and the way that your relationship to your body and what your body says and what your body feels is this really sort of informative component of the work that like you do in your life and the work that you do with your folks. So can you just you mentioned somatics and sort of the integration of that a little bit before, but can you just talk about your sort of beliefs around that and the importance of it and how it plays into these different pieces?
Yeah, I mean, this is something that I'm not an expert in. This is something I'm very much in active learning mode, which is a great place to be in, because I think honestly, I'll probably be in that place for the rest of my life, because there's so much. You can go so deep. The layers are so much. But I have oftentimes really relied on my intellect throughout life. If I was just the smartest, if I got straight A's, if I was in all AP classes, like I'd be fine. And now I've gotten to a place where I've realized that has almost stolen some of the knowledge that my body has, if that makes sense. And so, I mentioned I'm very influenced by Resmaa Menakem, and I recommend everybody reads his book, My Grandmother's Hands. Like, just everybody needs to read it, because there's a lot of somatic practices in there that will help us get back in touch with our body. And, there's this presentation I used to do about kind of dismantling imposter syndrome for fundraisers, and how imposter phenomenon, imposter thoughts show up there's a different flavor of it for fundraisers, and for fundraisers of color specifically. And there used to be a slide that I would show, and it was a picture of the top philanthropists by giving in 2019. I think I did this presentation like in 2020. And I mean, guess what the slide looked like? Like, you can guess what it looked like. And if we are not in touch with our body, it's very easy for us to look at that and then just like keep on going, like keep on moving, just override whatever potentially had come up. But when we're in touch with our body, it can be like, okay, how did this make me feel? Like, nobody that looks like me is on here. Like, there's no women on here. I think there was one. I think it was like Priscilla. It was Mark Zuckerberg's wife. And so it's like getting in touch with what is evoked in our body when these things come up, because we are activated all the time by different things. And unless we deal with that, it's going to come out sideways. It's going to come out as, as fear, as, as crying when we don't even know why, as all these different things. Our body is so smart. Our body has so much intelligence. And we have just like delegated it to the realm of, oh, it's just like, we're just a meat sack that's walking around. But if we listen to it, like, there's so much stored there that can really help us get to this place where we're integrated with our vision, right? To move it full circle, because there's going to be things that we just can't access unless we do that hard work of sitting with ourselves. And I don't know that you can figure out how to just like do this, because we're so ingrained in our ways of overriding what our body needs. I would encourage people to work with a somatic coach, a somatic practitioner, a somatic masseuse, like people who have really been in tune and trained to learn about the body's intelligences. Because the mind is just one form of I don't think it's even the smartest. Like, I think our body is far smarter, because it's storing everything. It's carrying around everything that we have been through, that our parents have been through, our grandparents have been through, and it has the answers. We just have to listen. So, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I want to go into what you said about imposter syndrome and the unique flavor of imposter syndrome for fundraisers. Tell me a little bit about what that means.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, as fundraisers, we are out there in the world asking for funds. And that brings up a whole lot of things, because the power dynamics that are just ever present in fundraising are are set up in a certain way where we are never on the top. Like as fundraisers, we generally are not on the top of the power dynamic when we're going into a meeting. But I think that we also have the ability to change that. Like we do have because the thing is if we are not there as the bridge to the organization, these social ills cannot be addressed. And so the power dynamics should be equal. They should be 50-50. And so I think it's up to us to do the hard work of overcoming these imposter thoughts that have been planted into us. Like they're not ours. But one example, like, so there's a book that I love. You've probably read it. It's by Edgar Villanueva. And it's called Decolonizing Wealth. Yeah. And so he has a chapter called Colonial Social Architecture. And he tells the story of like rolling onto the manicured grounds of a foundation in Virginia in his old beat up Honda Civic as like as a fundraiser. And so you can already see like the difference in the power dynamics from day one. And it's like he talks about how the property even had a name. Like the building was called Reynolda, and it looked like a plantation because it was like back in the day. And this foundation was built by a man who was a large scale tobacco farmer, and he also happened to be one of the largest like slaveholders in Virginia. And so this family had invented prepackaged cigarettes. Like that was how they had all of their money, right? That was the origin of their wealth. And today, what they give money to is health and human services in their state. And so there's this like misalignment. There's this like, we can start to think that we're crazy because we're like, what is going on? And so we know in our bodies, right? Something's wrong. Like something's weird. Like, why am I asking for fun? Sometimes it feels like begging for funds to help the communities that we served who are dying of, like, let's just say lung cancer from smoking prepackaged cigarettes. And the place we're getting the funds are a big part of why they're dying in the first place. Like, are we crazy? What? And so it's kind of points to the institution of philanthropy in itself, which, in some spaces and places, it can be very like, I'm almost struggling for words. There's been kind of a whitewashing of philanthropy, right? And so we know that sometimes, and that can have an impact on our ability to fundraise, because it's like, what I'll say is there came a point where it was so confusing that it just became very confusing. And you can tell, like, I'm wrestling for words because I'm still working on figuring out what was happening. But I knew that my job was to raise funds. I knew that I was passionate about what I was doing. Yet the ways that we were going about it, it didn't seem right. It just didn't seem right. And that causes imposter thoughts, because, like, is something wrong with me? Like, everyone else seems to be doing okay with all of this. Why am I having these thoughts, right? And then, of course, I'll share another story. We did, as you know, we served women who are struggling with addiction. And so I had experiences of going to a funder's office building like that, not like a plantation per se, but really fancy buildings that looked more like a bank than any kind of, institution of giving, it looked like a bank. And so I'd be at this swanky funder's office. I'd be stressing out about, am I dressed up enough? Am I acting proper enough? Like, do I belong here? And then in the afternoon, I would accompany our like understaffed intake person to pick up, a young woman impacted by heroin addiction at this like shady hotel room. And the two experiences couldn't be farther apart, right? And they happened in the same day, and they were both, related to fundraising, or at least to social impact. And so it's like the buildings of philanthropy are so physically different and distant from the communities that we aim to support. And I think that discrepancy can make us, the change maker or the fundraiser, feel like we don't belong, like there's something less than about us, and just continue to, create these unequal power dynamics.
I think what you're talking about is so critical. And I experienced so many similar things, even actually in the confusion, like when you were sort of grappling even here with that confusion, it actually really resonated with me. I mean, I often say that I thought for most of my career that I was a bad fundraiser because I thought there was no way that good fundraisers felt the way I felt. Like there was just this belief, I think exactly like what you said, that there's no way everybody else feels like this. There's no way everybody else feels. And I think if we could even just dispel that myth alone in the sector to say, guess what? 95% of people actually feel that way because of this disconnect that exists around us systematically and the way that these power dynamics show up. And I do, my course is really designed around a strategy to shift the power dynamics at the table. And for me, one of the key pieces to that is that the power dynamics do not change if the only thing of value is money. Like it is not until we start to see, recognize, embody value in things beyond money that all starts to shift. Because if money is the thing that holds all the value at the table, then the person with the most money is always going to be the thing that holds the power at the table. And, there have been a lot of stories inside Power Partners of people raising tons of money, but by far my favorite story was a executive director who told me about turning down $1 million.
Ooh, because it had bad vibes attached to it.
It was out of alignment. It wasn't even
Yes.
actually, the funder was in alignment, but what they were asking her to do was not. It was going to run her staff ragged. It was going to divert their attention from their core mission and vision. It was not, and she valued her knowledge of what was best for the organization, for the issue area, over the money enough to say, thank you so much for that offer. But no.
Oh, so amazing. That is so amazing. Oh, and I can only imagine how difficult that must have been, right? But the right decision. And I'm sure, after that happened, everything else just started aligning in the right way. Because that's what happens when we stay true to our values and our vision, as hard as it may be.
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, the funder came back and said, okay, thank you for telling us that. Like, we respect that. And here's, I think, like $200,000 for something that was really in alignment with what they were trying to do. And so I just think, like, to me, that was like, okay, this is one piece of the puzzle forward, because that's how that sort of like mutual respect and sort of more equal playing field starts to get created when we're not just taking money at all costs, right? When we're not contorting ourselves to the funder, when we're not creating a new program just to get that money. And I get it. Like, as a fundraiser, as an executive director for many years, like, I totally understand the stress and the pressure and the board pressure. And honestly, the validation, I think, that comes from getting money like that. Like, I think when we're experiencing this deep imposter syndrome, and then we have a reputable funder want to give us a lot of money, it like soothes us in a way that then feels so impossible to say no to, because all of a sudden we feel validation around this vulnerability that we've been grappling with. And so, but I do feel like, just in you sharing your story, me sharing my story, like, just having more language or stories around, like, if you feel uncomfortable, like, you're not alone, is a really core and really important thing for fundraisers to feel.
I just love that story so much. I'm so happy that you shared that with me, because I think as we share those examples, like you said, we can showcase that it is possible to do that. And I think a lot of us think, mission above all. Like, we're so mission driven. It's all about the mission. Like, how are we going to be able to get this done? And I think sometimes we have to, like, again, take that bigger 30,000 foot view and look at the vision and be more vision driven, because long term, and I'm talking really long term, like, I'm talking about, like, even after we are gone, like you and I are gone as fundraisers, like, how is this decision going to impact the people who would be served in 50 years, 100 years? And if it's not a good if it's not a good decision to take these funds because they'll be worse off, then
Mm.
of course the answer is no. So we have to expand our timeline a little bit. Yeah, this will look great on my P&L, but how will
Mm.
it actually look for, the individuals that are coming generations from now?
Mm. I saw a post recently that was for business owners that said something like, how would you run your business if you knew you were running it in 50 years or something, or 30
Mm,
years? And I just sat with that for a long time because I think, and I've been thinking about it in relation to fundraisers too, because I think exactly to your point, sometimes we are in this scarcity mindset that inhibits our ability to look down the line. And a lot of that is because of like the philanthropic structures around single year funding, and again, like things that are not
yes.
our fault. But what they do then is they sort of like corrupt the way we want to fundraise, and we start fundraising with the same mentality of the funding. And actually we can fundraise with a longer term vision than how the funders are behaving. And yes, 100% it's going to feel uncomfortable to do that. Like, but I think that to me, that's also, and I second your recommendations around finding a somatic coach or therapist, or I think working with a somatics professional has always been a big part of my life. And I couldn't agree more, because I think then sometimes when you find yourself in a moment of tension and you're trying to get clarity on like the right decision, your body knows, like you said.
Mm,
It's like, and our brains, there have been so many times with clients where I'm like, your brain can't answer this. Like your brain has the ability to make up a complete story around either option. And that's why you feel stuck, because your brain has a totally valid story for
right.
both decisions. So here we are, like, and we can't get past it. And I do some somatic work with my clients, and it's just interesting when I can walk them through a visualization, when I can ask them questions in a like heightened state of activation in their body, but with some clearing in their mind. It's like they know
Yes.
immediately what they
That's
want to
right.
do.
That's right. That doesn't necessarily mean it's easy to do the thing. But it's simple. It's not easy, but it's simple. The
It's
answer is always
clear.
there. It's
It's
clear.
clear. It's
That's right.
clear. Not easy, but clear. And then you still get the choice to go in that direction or not. I think that's another thing that's just really important for people to know, is that I think sometimes we don't want to access those truths because we're so scared about then what it means if it would be so hard to do it. And I think the reality is knowing the truth and still making a conscious choice around like, you know what, this time I am going to go with this decision for X, Y, and Z reason. I'm doing it consciously. I'm not exactly sure where it's going to lead, but even feeling that sense of choice, I think is really important. And then you'll learn, and then you can make a different choice next time if you want to, or you can make the same choice next time if you want to, but still like having that moment of like tapping in to yourself and trusting your own inner wisdom, I think is just so important.
If there's going to be one skill that you work on, I would say that's the one, because it
Mm,
transcends all areas of our life, right?
mm.
All areas of our life. Mm.
Yes. Okay. Let's just marinate in that and close out with just telling everyone where they can find you, who like who's the right person to sort of like work with you, who are your people, and where they should go to learn more.
Yeah. So probably the best way to find me is LinkedIn. That's my playground. That's where I kind of spend my time and build my community. And so that's just under my name. You could also go to my website, which is lumosmarketing.co. And that is Lumos after the Harry Potter spell for illumination. But
Mm.
one little known fact about the spell is that it actually helps illuminate unseen entrances and doorways. And that's what I think this work does. Thought leadership and personal branding helps us find those doorways that we never even knew were there, right? Um, And what was the other question? Like who I work with? I love working with vision-led female founders. So
Mm.
nonprofit founders, social impact entrepreneurs. Lately, I've been working with a lot of individuals who have left the nonprofit field because they were pissed off about something and now they've created a solution to overcome that, right?
Mm.
As a consultant. So yeah, anybody who's working on a big problem and they have a unique solution for it and just want more people to know about it, right? So
Mm.
that's kind of who I tend to work with. And I have a podcast too about these kinds of things, about storytelling and thought leadership and overcoming the itty bitty shitty committee, and that's called the Campfire Circle. So yeah, those are kind of the ways to get in touch with me.
Awesome. And I'll make sure all of those links are below as well. You should definitely check out her podcast and her work. And thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for the opportunity. I loved this conversation. I'm excited
Me
for next
too.
time.